You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, we've been waiting for a resolution to this issue that we spoke about the end of last week. That is Trump's $175 million bond that's being challenged by New York Attorney General Letitia James. So we do have a resolution now, which we're going to talk about in this video. But first, just a reminder for folks watching, Glenn and I will be covering the entirety of the Trump trial happening right now in Manhattan. So if you want to follow along with our coverage, which will be brief, right to the point, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are on the screen. They're also in the post description of this video. Okay, so Glenn, we have this resolution to Letitia James's effort to challenge Trump's $175 million bond. This is in the civil fraud trial in New York. Talk about what the issue was here and then what ended up happening.
Well, the issue, Brian, was that A.G. James filed a scorched earth pleading with the court objecting to the $175 million bond that Donald Trump secured to stop Tish James from being able to begin seizing his property, because he had to put up the bond in order to kind of perfect his appeal, and it would stave off Attorney General James being able to start seize his property to satisfy what was basically a $500 million money judgment that was entered against Donald Trump for his long-term, rampant, systemic business fraud. So when she filed this objection, I read it and I said, my goodness, she found so many deficiencies in this bond, both kind of legal deficiencies, factual deficiencies, that I think it very unlikely Judge Engoron is going to overlook it all and say, I'm going to say this bond was just fine. Really, in a nutshell, some of what she said was this bond company that's run by a guy named Don Hankey, can't make that up, who was actually a longtime associate of Donald Trump's. First of all, they didn't seem to have enough money in reserve, enough liquid assets to actually guarantee a $175 million bond. Why? Because the industry standard on bonds and sureties is you should only guarantee a bond for about 10% of your liquid assets, and the motion laid out that they had about $140 million of liquid assets at the Knight Specialty Insurance Company, which means they should only be guaranteeing a bond for about $14 million. Well, here they are guaranteeing a bond for $175 million. That was deficiency number one. Deficiency number two, they kind of outsourced lots of their stuff to the Cayman Islands, which the New York insurance regulators refer to as shadow insurance when you have your interests in the Cayman Islands. And the New York business regulators, the insurance regulators, said that this sounded alarms. That's language from Attorney General James pleading. Also, they said that the management of Knight Specialty Insurance Company had been involved in companies over the years that had violated federal laws, and they'd been sued and otherwise held accountable for violating federal laws. That was strike three, and there was a fourth strike that I'm not remembering right now, but ordinarily you only get three and you're out. So I saw the reporting break today, Brian, that nope, this bond is just fine, and I was surprised. But when I read what had gone on here, it looks like there was a deal struck. It looks like the Knight Specialty Insurance Company agreed that they would actually get, we don't know where they got this money from, they would take $175 million, put it in an interest-bearing account, put it under lock and key so it can't be touched or accessed. And Attorney General James said, okay, under those circumstances, and she was satisfied with whatever safeguards and checks would be put in place to make sure that they could make good on that promise. Under those circumstances, we will not continue to object. So basically, the parties entered into an agreement, and they kind of sidestepped the necessity of now launching into hearings that Judge Engoron would preside over to decide whether the original bond arrangement was satisfactory or not.
Well, Glenn, if the public has the right to know who was guaranteeing Trump's bond, like in this case, we know that it was Knight Specialty, and now we don't know who is putting up the money for Knight Specialty. I mean, don't we have the right to know where they got the rest of their money from? I mean, what's to stop the Saudis or the Russians from giving money to Knight Specialty to then guarantee a bond for Donald Trump? And then that would pose the same problem as if those people had directly given Donald Trump the money to satisfy this bond.
Yeah, in theory, yes. In practice, perhaps not. But really, even more importantly, when the parties, and in this case, it is Donald Trump, and on the other side, it is the people of New York as represented by their Attorney General, Letitia James, when they enter into an agreement and they coordinate and they have meetings and they decide that whatever arrangement they've agreed to is satisfactory, such that the Attorney General, representing the people of New York, basically withdraws her opposition. We may not be privy to all of those details, but the point is the court will no longer have a hearing that might probe some of those very issues that you raise that would be, enormous concerns, if not red flags. Where's the money coming from? It could be that, Knight Specialty Insurance Company has other companies that they have taken some of the funds from to, up their liquid assets to $175 million. We don't know what the details are, but Letitia James does. So whatever arrangement they reached was to her satisfaction. And here's the thing, I don't know that I'll ever find myself to be in a position to second guess New York Attorney Letitia James, given how remarkably she has performed from start to finish in this litigation.
Okay, that's fair. Glenn, do you agree with how this thing was settled?
I find it hard to disagree, in part because I'm not privy to the negotiations between the parties that resulted in Tish James basically saying, okay, this is now acceptable to the people of New York. Here's where I have, I think, the greatest concern. He's on the receiving end, Donald Trump, of a nearly $500 million money judgment. And he said, look, I can't possibly put up a bond for that much. So he went hat in hand to the New York Appeals Court seeking what was, in essence, a fraud forgiveness program. And they said, here's what we're going to do for you, Donald. We're going to drop it from $500 million to $175 million. And they did that, in essence, in a one-page ruling with no explanation, no analysis, and no supporting authority. Not a single case did the New York Appeals Court cite as authority for this weighty decision they have made, this enormous favor that they did for Donald Trump. We still have no explanation for why they did it. That is where my principal concern lies with respect to this $175 million bond.
Okay, so now the $175 million bond was accepted. Donald Trump is now seeking to appeal this case. So is it the case that now we're going to have to wait, 6 months to a year before we see this appeal, until this thing is going to be on the back burner until then?
I'm afraid that is the case. Now, what I will say is each of the 50 states is laboring under their own sort of backlog of appeals. Every appellate court in every jurisdiction, that includes the federal courts of appeals, kind of struggle under backlogs, crushing caseloads. How long the New York Court of Appeals will take to resolve this appeal? Could it be expedited? Could it be within 3, 4, 5, 6 months, perhaps? Could it be as long as a year? It certainly could.
Okay, well, we'll obviously stay on top of this trial as it continues to progress, along with the rest of Donald Trump's prosecutions that he's contending with, including the Manhattan criminal trial that's happening right now. So for those watching, if you want to follow along with all of these prosecutions, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.